Once again. And just wanted to remind everyone that while we are in main session, we will be recording. If we head into a breakout, we will turn off the recording so that participants can share as they feel like sharing. Um, My name, again, Andrew Kronk. I'm the CS Ed Specialist at the Oregon Department of Education. If you haven't already done so, it'd be great if you could update your Zoom name and title. That sometimes is helpful when we have larger groups. With smaller groups, it can be a little more informal, but if you're able to, that would be great. Um, and I think we're just going to dive right in here. All right. So, what I'm hoping to do with this time together today is to share some resources related to computer science standards, really ground this work in equity, and spend some time talking about the definitions and history of standards, and some of the very real challenges that come up when you're in the process of developing standards in any discipline. I'd like to talk about the timeline for this work and then give everyone an opportunity to sort of get a sneak peek of the work in progress. It is very much a work in progress. And I would be delighted to add your feedback to the conversations that are ongoing. All right, here is an agenda. Those of you who have been in presentations with me before know that hope springs eternal. Whether I'm able to follow it, but I will do my best. Like again, I'll do a presentation for the first bit, and then we will have time for conversations, looking at the standards and getting some feedback. Alrighty. I recognize that we come from many different perspectives, and I don't imagine that we're all going to agree on every issue that comes up, and that's fine. And I just want to offer these norms for communication. If you've been in sessions with me before, these may seem familiar, but let's always keep our conversation equity and student focused. Listen to each other with curiosity and ask clarifying questions when we need to. Share the airtime and be respectful of each other's differences of opinions. And finally, just accept that we may not have closure on every issue, but not to let that be cause for inaction. All right. Um, so as part of diving into standards, I have been doing quite a bit of reading, and I just wanted to take a moment to share some of the things that I think were helpful for me and for our team and for the work group working on this as we our way into the process of working on standards. Um, the first link there, CS for Oregon standards. And this is the point where I remember I have not shared the slide deck, and I had meant to. In the chat is a link to the slide deck. Please feel free to follow along or race ahead as you will. Um, I will be referring to links in the slides, and the slide deck is sort of your way to follow links as needed as we move forward. So there you have it. Anyway, that first link there, the CS for Oregon Standards 2019, really is um, the alpha version of the recently released implementation plan that some people in this group may have even worked on that back in 2019. And it is the starting place for this work. That document embraced the fairly recently released at that time CSTA 2017 standards and really included a lot of Oregon-specific context. It's a good read if you have the chance to look it over. Also on this list, I'd like to point out to you is the CSTA Reimagining CS Pathways official release document. It is their first interim report during the national organization's process of developing standards for release in 2026. Um, it's uh, anyway, it has a lot of good information and has helped sort of guide some of our process and given us some insight where the national organization is headed, and we are going to try to be aligning or at least heading in the same direction. A couple more things to highlight. The Teach AI CS in an age of AI is a document that contains 3 briefs. I especially enjoyed the first one, which makes the case of why learning to program is still really important and fundamental, even in an age of AI where the AI could write a lot of it for you. So that was a good read. And then everything from the Kapor Center is grounded in equity and exceptional work. All right. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about just equity and standards. Our work is grounded and centered in equity, and both ODE and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission have very strong equity stances that are North Star. And yet we live in interesting times. It was just a few months ago, I was in a conference in another state where just bringing up the topic of equity and diversity and inclusion is in any sort of official capacity is grounds for, sanction, censure, dismissal, and even prosecution. And so I feel very fortunate to live in a state where these conversations can happen, are in fact supported and encouraged. I know many of you are familiar with ODE's equity stance, but I want to highlight it again. Education equity is the equitable implementation of policy practices, procedures, and legislation that translates into resource allocation, education rigor, and opportunities for historically and currently marginalized youth, students, and families, including civil rights protected classes. This means the restructuring and dismantling of systems and institutions that create the dichotomy of beneficiaries and the oppressed and marginalized. And I always like to keep that close at hand when I dive into work. And with that, I'd like you to take just a moment to think about, how are standards connected with equity, and how can standards help create more equitable learning experiences in computer science statewide? And I don't need you to write anything. You don't need to share out unless you feel so moved. But I would ask you just to take 15 seconds. And if you were in an elevator and someone asked you, hey, how can standards help create equitable learning experiences in computer science statewide? What might you say? So I posed this question to the work group that's been meeting throughout June, July, and August. Um, uh, and here are some snips from what they shared with me. Um, and I'm pausing, Kathy, like, wow. Yeah. Uh,
Right? Isn't that a scary stat? That was presented at our last NC-WIT team meeting this week. That's
yeah,
crazy because I have to work in that field too, right? Daily. And so that I am also thankful of being in Oregon. So thanks for pointing that out, Andrew.
yeah. And I knew that many states had moved in that direction, but I didn't know that stat, and that is just very troubling and a sign of our times. So here are some thoughts from the work group about equity and standards. And, just in summary, I think standards help ensure consistency in learning experiences, regardless of where you live or who your teacher might be. It helps guide teachers in developing and reflecting on curriculum. It helps create vertical alignment so that, as student moves through the grades, they have learning experiences in computer science that sync up with what happened before and where they're headed. And I think it's very helpful to have standards to help build a foundation for teacher training. Should we ever get to the point where we're able to move more um, swiftly with micro credentials or even an endorsement way down the road. All right. Um, let's talk a little bit about a little history lesson. So, if you ever play Dungeons and Dragons, the comic here makes a little more sense. I just like it because it uh, kind of highlights the nuance between optional and unofficial. And I just want to touch briefly on this distinction, as that became very important when we approached the State Board of Education originally with this idea. So what we're working on will be Oregon's official but optional standards. They'll be official, so I expect that they will be on our website and available widely. And if people ask, oh, what are Oregon standards in computer science? Boop, that's what we point them to. But they will be optional until such time that there's legislative action and direction to make computer science a content area. Um, because right now, computer science is not identified in law as a content area, these will have to remain optional, which means districts can choose to refer to them, choose to use them as a resource, and I really hope they will. But they're not required to in any sort of capacity. And as I mentioned before, there was earlier work on computer science standards, and this is back from 2019. Um, uh, you know, again, these were never officially adopted, but they serve as our launch point for the work here in 2024. The work was collaborative, it was multi-district. It was focusing on creating a clear and concise definition of computer science. It focused on understanding the landscape, the current landscape and barriers to opportunities in computer science statewide. It looked at the K-12 CS framework put out by CSTA. Um, uh, and in many ways, it was, sort of the blueprint for uh, much of the groundwork that went into developing the 2023 implementation plan. So if you were involved with this work, hats off to you because it was um, really foundational and helpful in helping us to get started on this effort as well. All right, so what are we trying to do with standards in 2024? Um, so of course, front and center is grounding the work in equity. Um, and what we're doing is we're building on the release from 2019. I'm going to talk a little bit in just a moment about some of the challenges, but there are a number of approaches. We could have just started from whole cloth. We could have also just rubber stamped the existing standards. And we're trying to find something right in the middle. Some other goals. I want this work to be designed in such a way that it becomes congruent with what I am anticipating is released in 2026. I'll talk a little bit about that on the timeline slide as well. Another goal is for this work to complement the Oregon CTE Information and Communication Technology Knowledge and Skills Statements, and those are linked back on the resources page earlier in the presentation. Um, uh, so far, everything that we've worked on seems to be pretty compatible. I haven't found anything that we've discussed that is running perpendicular to the knowledge and skill sets. We are very fortunate to have with us in Zoom space Jeff Rhodes, who works with these closely. Jeff, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to go off mute and just share a short um, synopsis of kind of the role of the knowledge and skills statements, I think people would appreciate kind of hearing a little bit about that.
Absolutely, Andrew. I'd be happy to just kind of share a little bit of the support that ODE has put behind career and technical education and understanding the role that CTE programs of study currently play in the landscape of computer science in our state. We have several CTE teachers who are on this work group and kind of ensuring that we are using a CTE lens as we kind of develop these standards with the idea that there's a high level of integration with the knowledge and skill statements that already exist. Really with the focus that these standards will be able to kind of supplement the work that is being done by our teachers and not add an existing layer of what might appear to be additional work needed to be done by our teachers in computer science. So there's really been a concerted effort to make sure that we are not just putting another thing on our CTE teachers' plates, but really that these standards will be something that can highlight work that we know is already being done by our computer science teachers. And hopefully, especially for those that are new to CTE, help provide a little bit more of a blueprint and a guidance for them as they develop those programs of study. So really acknowledging the role that CTE has played in our current landscape of computer science, and just kind of hopefully continuing to elevate and support CTE and CTE programs of studies and the teachers that lead those programs as we advance and move this work forward.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And just lastly, goals for this work is that what we are able to release in the near future addresses advances in technology, particularly in AI, being that that has emerged in a paradigm-shaking way on the scene. So let's talk a little bit about some of the changes that CSTA has been telegraphing through their first convening. So if you look at the 2017 document, you'll see that the standards are organized into 5 concepts, and it looks like 7 practices. The recommendations so far for the 2026 release is to shift a little bit the emphasis a bit away from programming and more into data science and artificial intelligence and algorithms. There will be 5 topic areas. You see those in the square boxes sort of in that clover-shaped graphic there. And then there are 4 pillars, and those are around the 5 topic areas. And then there are dispositions, and dispositions are practices of and habits of mind and attitude. They are success skills, I think, is one of what they reminded me of. So we are trying to adapt to this new framework, kind of rolling the dice, hoping that this is the framework they end up with. And we'll see that a bit more when we get into the standards themselves. All right, let's talk about some of the challenges. So quite a bit of our conversations have been around this central idea, and it was named pretty clearly in the CSDA interim report that there's this tension between the desire for continuity with the current standards and the desire to modify the essential content extensively. And, you know, for me, this comes down to this idea of granularity. Like, how refined do we want these standards to be? Do we want them to be really high level that could apply to lots of different classes and potentially grade levels? Or do we want them very specific, more like the course content outcome guides that are colleges and universities use when they are defining a class. And we've had some very fruitful discussions around this. Given where we are at in this process, given the bigger landscape of what's going on, I feel that it is important that we move forward with reasonable velocity towards an outcome that can be achieved in a short to medium timeline. And, for me, that's another, 2 to 6 months. If you look at other content areas, you'll see that their standard documents are very mature and they've gone through many revisions. And they are quite detailed, like hundreds of pages. And they would be great for us to get there, but it may take some time to get there. And I don't want to wait until 2026 for this work to get started or to release something that then has to be revised. I think this work is important. And I think the fact that we are doing this work is just as important as the work itself. I know that's may not make any sense, but the process that we're going through of doing this work is helping highlight the importance of computer science education. It's getting computer science talked about in different environments. And that is just as important as what we're doing as the final outcome. So the task that I've asked the work group that I'm asking you is to focus on the existing standards and sort of accept that is the level of granularity roughly that we are looking for. It is, I know that it could be very helpful, and many practicing teachers have expressed this very clearly. It'd be super helpful, Andrew, if I had for this particular course, like kind of a list of outcomes and standards. And then I could, feel very confident I'm teaching to it and refer to families to it. While that would be awesome, I think it is beyond the scope of what we can achieve at this point. So the task that I've put forth is, hey, let's move the current standards forward so that they reflect advances in technology and changes in priority, and have those ready for by the late 2024, early 2025. All right. Jeff talked a little bit about the skill sets, and I just wanted to include, maybe I should have asked Jeff to talk on this slide, but here's just a quick overview of what they are. Industry created, industry validated list of knowledge and skills. They're linked in the resources page, and one of our goals is to make sure that we're lining up congruent with the directions those suggest. All right. Timeline. So when I first realized that, hey, a lot of things in the implementation plan really depend on having a conversation around standards. And we pivoted towards this work, I quickly realized that there's some things about computer science that is a little bit special. We don't have a legislative mandate to do this work, and hence the standards are going to be optional. It's also different is that we're picking up some earlier work left off, and that we have this now tremendous advance in technology in the form of artificial intelligence. So all that needs to be sort of factored into the process. So when I started envisioning the timeline, I just realized this is going to have to be flexible. And, that's not all that crazy. If you think about the implementation plan from last year, we did not initially imagine that we'd do 3 phases. That third phase for more public comment was added when it became apparent we needed more feedback. And so, the process adapted to the needs of the participants. And so what we see here is sort of an initial timeline, initial kickoff in June. And in some ways you could back that up a little bit because, you know, it was really February where I realized, you know, I need to start working on this. And then it took a couple test runs to get the State Board of Education on. And so then, you know, we were able to start with the initial work group in June. And we've been meeting regularly for the throughout July and August. And I figured at around September, there'd be a point where we stop this first phase and kind of take stock where we're at. And I thought, well, you know, maybe we'll be just ready to go out, you know, roll something out, start have some public engagement, and then share with the State Board of Education. And it's clear that that was rather optimistic and that the top row is a much more realistic timeline. And this is how I shared it with people who have asked, that there was going to be a flexible approach, and certainly have the support of our director at ODE, of our team, for having a flexible approach. We're going to release it when it's ready to be released. And I'm thinking like, wait, you know, that's not that unprecedented. I think about was it Larian Studios? A lot of software shops are, you know, they're like, yeah, we're gonna test this out. We'll have an alpha and a beta, and then we'll release when it seems to be ready to go. And that's sort of the approach I'm considering as well. I would love to see something ready for distribution in December. A lot of great reasons for that. But you know, we need to get the initial draft done and have some additional public engagement sessions, and we'll get there when we get there. All right. A few more things before we get to the standards themselves. Just some historical background on how Oregon defines standards. There are many, many definitions of academic content standards, and you know, every state has its own sort of definition there. You'll find many similarities, but also some important nuances and distinctions. But the definition from the Oregon website, the ODE website, is the academic content standards define what a student should know and be able to do within a content area at specific stages in their education. What I like about Oregon's definition is that it makes sense. It's not full of education jargon. You know, random person on our website could say, okay, I kind of get that. That makes sense. But as I mentioned, there are many different definitions, and wanted to share the U.S. Department of Education and the Institution of Education Sciences definition. I'm not going to read these. I'll let you skim that. But what I like about the U.S. Department of Education definition is the strong connection to post-secondary outcomes, either in higher education or in technical careers. And I also like the guidance they provide to encourage us to make standards that are clear and specific, written in jargon-free, straightforward, and accessible prose. And you know, that is not easy to do, especially in a discipline like computer science, which tends to be a jargon and you know, heavy, and there's a lot of domain-specific vocabulary, a lot of acronyms. But yeah, we're going to do our best with that. And with the second definition, what I like about the Institute of Education Sciences definition is the emphasis on longitudinal coherence. That is a buzz phrase, but the idea that computer science education starts in kindergarten and continues through grade 12. All right. And sort of for completeness sake, I've just added a couple slides on the legal foundation of standards. I'm just going to highlight a few. There's a lot more out there if you're interested in that sort of thing. Under Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, each state is responsible for implementing a state assessment system that is coherent and consistent with the state. The ESEA requires the state to develop and implement a challenging academic content and achievement standards in a number of different disciplines. That was signed in 1965 and reauthorized as ESSA, or Every Student Succeeds, in 2015. ESSA kind of expanded ESEA with the requirement that all students be taught academic standards that prepare them to succeed in college and careers. So when we dig down into Oregon statutes, we've got a couple here. Oregon Revised Statute 329.045 lists the current content areas for which standards are required. If you scan that, you will not see computer science on that list, and it will take legislative action for computer science to be added to that list. ORS 329.075 charges the Oregon Department of Education with responsibility for developing, among other things, academic content standards. Alrighty, so that is my overview, and I am more or less on my time target, so huzzah. So what I would like to do, and given that we're a smaller group, I'm going to pause in a moment and get some feedback on the best way to do this. Is there is work in progress, and your feedback would be exceptionally helpful. The format for these docs that if you've looked ahead, you'll see them on the next slide that I'm sharing. The standards are broken down into grade bands, and the original 2017 standard is in blue. And then you'll see the original concept, the original practices, the standard, and some clarifying language. And then you will see in green a place for updating that language. And as you go through the different grade bands, you'll see places where the work group has really focused. You'll see some places where there's revised language and draft clarification. You're going to also see some places where there's nothing, like, and it's not like groups started at the top and just worked their way through it. Groups took a lot of different strategies, and so you're going to see some standards which don't have any comments on them at all yet. What would be super helpful is for anyone here who has the inclination, interest, and time to join with us in these documents. And depending on your level of comfort, either taking the standard itself and like copying it and pasting it down into the revised greens box cell and like update the language. And if you have some ideas for clarification or examples, that's super helpful too. But maybe you read it and your feedback is, I think this is still important, Andrew. Let's make sure something like this gets in the final version, the updated version. Like, that's super helpful too. And that can just go in the notes. That's the blue column to the far right. And I see a good point, Jeffrey. So it may be challenging to navigate this on a phone, this part. And what I wanted to share is that this can be open. I recognize that it's a sunny day out. And we've got a number of options here. One option is to just pause and give people time. People can go off camera. I don't think we need to go into breakout groups. I was going to recommend 20 minutes to kind of scan a great band of interest, have some time for conversation, and then some time for updating. But we can do a number of different things there. But I'm leaving these links in this doc open for at least the next 10 days. So if people wanted to, look at it during lunch or at another time when it's more convenient, or you're looking at it today and you're like, huh, well, I didn't think of it then, but now I think of something I wanted to add. You can jump in there and add something later. What I will be doing in September, will be taking feedback from this session and anyone else who wants to jump on and add feedback, as well as the feedback from the work the work group is sharing, and sort of merge it all together and try to get something that feels like a very rough draft, and then go through some iterations of refining that. I'd like to pause here and open it up for conversation, discussion, both if there are questions, and also just some feedback on what's the best way to proceed. I don't want anyone to feel like they're hostage to like a feedback session. And if it makes more sense for people to, Andrew, I'm totally interested in giving you some feedback, but I've got some time coming up later on this week. That makes sense too. So let's open it up for group discussion and a conversation about what people's timelines are feeling like and looking like, and where people are at this point in the process.
So Andrew, I appreciate that flexibility. That 10 days is appropriate. I think if we're looking, I'm not because I'm retired, but teachers will be looking forward to 10 days of some flex time before they have to drop in. And I might suggest also that you could, if I were doing an in-service, I think it would be legitimate for when you're asked to work on standards or whatever your administration asks you to do. Working on this document to give feedback and or use it to set up where you're headed is certainly appropriate. So you may very well have in-service time, which may be beyond 10 days from now, but you might even be paid to look at these standards to become familiar with them and offer feedback. And then I guess the question I have for you, Andrew, these all have draft associated with them. If I was in a classroom and I'm sitting in service and my administrator says, hey, T, you've got to have your standards posted. You have to have your standards in your documents, in your web presence, and so forth and so on. Is this ready for prime time, even though it's not ready for prime time, so that I could and my colleagues could post and begin to crosswalk with my curriculum?
I would urge no.
Okay.
I don't think they are ready for prime time. These are very much in the sort of brainstorm, free write stage. I do think that, come December, we might be very close to having something that does meet that requirement. But if there is a staff member in that position right now, I would say stay with the canon, the 2017 published standards. They still have a lot of life in them and a lot of longevity. And a lot of these, I think, are going to move forward with some modest updates in language and scope. But I would not recommend people start using these in any official way. And probably what, I've got on the documents themselves, it says draft, but I'll go ahead and put a watermark on it or something so that people know, because if it's shared more broadly than this group, I don't want anyone to stumble upon it and think, oh, great, I got ODE standards ahead of the curve, when, in reality, in 3 months, it could look very different. And I don't want anyone to get tripped up on that. Randy, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Um, so this is probably the first time many of us has seen any of the draft standards,
Yeah.
but from what I understand, there is a group in Oregon that has put together this draft.
Yeah, there's a work group of about, I want to say 20 individuals. I think there's, well, I know there are a number of OCSDA members on it. I think a member from the board is on it. There are a number of higher ed folks, and there are a number of industry folks. And, when we were crafting that group, I wanted to keep it a little bit more agile than the implementation plan consult group, which was 45 or so individuals. But I did work to try to bring in folks from different parts of the state and different areas. So yeah, that group is continuing to meet. We have another meeting coming up, I think next week. And then I think we're going to do some asynchronous work until we get to a draft. But I'm happy to share with OCSTA sort of this snapshot of the work in progress to get feedback. And, this is a case, Randy, where I think more is more. um, I'm looking for breadth more than depth, because even a feedback is that like this standard should move forward, even if it's not perfect, even if there's not more detail than that even that much information is helpful. So
And so do you anticipate the feedback that maybe you gather from these docs going back to that uh other committee and having them incorporate it into their drafts? So I assume they're gonna be, you know, updating and modifying their own work, right? So what what might be the process for kind of merging these kind of parallel inputs?
yeah. Absolutely, there needs to be a merge, whether uh, depending on the volume of feedback I get between now and the next 10 days will sort of determine what that merge looks like. If it's a modest volume of feedback, then I can get it merged and the group can see it, sort of in real time. If it's a lot, then it may be sort of an asynchronous thing where I'm merging the two and then working asynchronously with the work group on the byproduct of the merge, and then continuing the feedback process until some point that like there's something in every box and I can just basically go back to kind of this format where it's open to anyone. I'd like to have like kind of a rough draft ready to go before I start like several rounds of public engagement.
Okay, so the public, so when you're talking about public engagement, it's like what you did earlier with the implementation draft is
Yes,
you'll have a series of sort of talking sessions. But
exactly.
and the idea then is this draft will be pretty complete before you start that.
Yes,
It's like this is what we came up with. Um, what do you think?
yeah. I mean, I didn't know when we started this process because I think, Randy, we talked about the possibility of having a share out, a kind of a preview event at SuperQuest before we even had our first work group meeting. And I didn't know, like, are we going to be almost done? Are we going to be halfway done? Are we going to, yeah. And we're not almost done, that's for sure. So we're not anywhere near where I would say, yep, we're ready for like formal public engagement.
So I guess my question is like, what is the timeline for this other group that's working on this draft? Like, I mean, if we give feedback, is it a moving target that we're trying that we're trying to give
Oh,
feedback
no.
on? And so and then separately is like, do they have a deadline for when this needs to, are you setting that, or is something else setting the deadline for this to be done?
So uh when the work group was formed, I asked for their time through the summer. Um, so once we hit the end of August, their commitment to the project has been met. I'm hoping that some folks are still willing to engage like in a asynchronous manner but it will be sort of on me to then get uh, wherever we leave off to initial draft state. Um, and I
So that's the
certainly
end of
understand.
August.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. And that's why you want to get our feedback by like the 16th, because
Yes,
that's like 2 weeks before the end. Okay.
exactly. Because I, I hear you because I wouldn't want to like, well, I'm giving feedback but I'm on a branch that's already obsolete in the tree.
Exactly.
And so it's not
Exactly.
worth my
Right.
time. Like I just
Right.
wasted my time.
Are we,
Um,
yeah, are we merging stuff in real time, or are we aiming at a target that's already moved?
yeah. I think I said 10 days. I think what I really mean is 9 days because I think the team meets again on the 15th. So
Oh,
anything that
okay.
I have between now from OCSTA between now and the 15th is stuff that I can get more eyes on. After that, then it's kind of up to me to merge the feedback in until I have a draft.
Okay. Very good. I don't want to monopolize all the time here. Thank you for answering those questions.
Yeah, of course, Randy. Hi, Stephanie.
Okay. I have some questions on kind of how the standards fit together. So in math world, we have uh, sorry, Zoom says it looks like you're done talking. I don't know what that means. In math world, like if a student doesn't pass ninth grade algebra, they get held back in ninth grade algebra, in theory, until they've met those standards and can move on. Whereas at least in my world in computer science, my students probably have not seen the K2 computer science standards. They have probably not seen the 910 computer science standards, or they're probably seeing any computer science standard for the very first time. Or what's labeled 910, they might be seeing for the first time as an 11th grader or a 12th grader when they first take that. So as if I'm a current teacher looking at the 11-12 standards, is that what I should be looking at, or should I be looking further back, like for an intro class? Like, help me figure out how to think about this.
If it's an intro class, I would encourage you to focus more on the 910 standards. Um, the grade bands are a construct that comes from the 2017 CSTA release. And I've gotten feedback that, maybe we focus less on grade bands and focus more on topics um, or practices. Um, that is an ongoing conversation. In some ways, the grade bands are just more of a convenient indexing system. With reference to your initial comment about holding students back in computer science, like I would never want to see any student dissuaded from stepping into any computer science class that they and their teacher think they're ready for.
Yes,
Um,
and I'm sorry, I was not trying to advocate that for that. I was more
I
trying
know
to
you weren't.
I was more trying to highlight that in math, when I get a student in my math class, I can assume skills that they have coming in.
Yes.
Whereas with computer science and the standards, the math standards assume skills that they have coming in. So I think more succinctly, my question is there what do the bands assume the previous bands have been learned? And if so, how do I tackle that as a teacher?
Um, I think there is less building on other skills in computer science than you would see in mathematics. I do think mathematics, because of the nature of mathematics, does have more of this building upon earlier skills. You know, in some ways, you are highlighting why computer science teachers are exceptionally awesome, because, you know, you have always had to adapt to lots of different skill sets coming in. You get the students that have been doing this since second grade Lego Mindstorm camp, and you've got students that had a hole in their schedule that had to be filled, and there they are, and they're not sure why they're there. And or what do you got for me? And that takes a tremendous amount of skill. Other disciplines have had numerous iterations of the adoption process, and their standards are just more developed and more mature. And computer science, I think, will get there. And with the proper support and the proper action, we will start seeing those foundational skills happening in early elementary and through middle school and then into high school. But we have to have a long-term vision and play a really long game to get there. And yeah, in the meantime, these standards are optional. I am hoping that when a teacher is having conversations with administrators about adopting a new class or looking at an existing class, and like, why is this class important, or what should it be focused on? The standards can be a tool to help refine that conversation, or help really justify, yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, I'm doing that. This is great. So that's what I got, Stephanie.
And then I just have one more question around that, which is with the Oregon implementation plan, is it I'm a little confused on the implementation plan with the, like, in 2027, is every school going to be required to teach computer science, and kind of how these standards and kind of fit in with it's not a content area, but you'll be required to offer it piece?
Yeah, that is an exceptionally insightful question. And it is in some ways the $1 million question that even those of us who are working in the department ask ourselves on a regular basis. Right now, the implementation plan is a set of recommendations. For it to get traction, we would need the legislature to grant the funds and the positional authority to move it forward. There is stuff in the works, but I don't have a sense right now where that's at. I had hoped to actually, I had hoped to talk about this at my February chat with OCSTA, and I thought I might have some insight to share about this, about that process at that time. And here we are, rolling into August, and it's still an unknown. So I continue to keep my fingers crossed, and I continue to be optimistic. And I also recognize, as many of you also recognize, that there are competing priorities. And that could be its own Zoom session. And those present challenges, and it remains to be seen quite how this all will play out in the weeks and months to come. I do know that at some point, a budget has to go forward, and that will sort of be the big reveal. It would be nice to know a little bit in advance on how that all is going to play out. And there is a process for public comment, and I do know that y'all you have a superpower, uh, and it's one that I don't have. You have a voice, and the nature of my position is I work in the executive branch of government. As such, it is not appropriate for me to lobby. And so I am not able to, call up policymakers and say, hey, let's talk about this. But that is something that all of you are able to do. And I understand that limitation for me, because and that makes sense. There's a separation of powers. My role is to take the policies as given by the legislature and implement them with the greatest fidelity and quality as possible. And that's what I'll continue to do. Um, uh, and there are some folks that are really advocating for computer science. And if you're wondering how you might do that, I would encourage you to check in with Pete Seinfeld. He's been doing a lot of outreach, and so I think Pete might be a good resource for folks if they're curious on the other side of that.
So Andrew, Pete works with Oregon Computer Science Teachers Association and with TechStart. For those of you who aren't sure who Andrew is referring to, and he's a very active advocate for this. Now that said, and Andrew, you wash your hands a little bit about, and you're forced to not, in the sense of not being able to do a lot of political promotion, but Oregon Computer Science Teachers Association and TechStart and others can. Do you know of any of the current status of any efforts for legislative efforts for the long session? I know that there's conversations on our board and with TechStart that of getting something done, and I believe the October 27th is a deadline for legislative concepts or bills to be written. Does that square up with what you know?
I wasn't aware of that specific deadline, but I knew it was this fall. And I know that there are things in the works, but it is not in my purview to be actively promoting, or I'm not involved in the conversations about what priorities are moving forward, which ones won't.
Okay, then I'll just say, all right, Andrew, take a step off just a little bit because you're forced to. What I can tell you is that Senator Solomon and Dembro and Courtney Muron are folks, legislators that we think can drive some of that legislation. But if you know the legislature, you know that that a bill can be created and a suggestion can be made, but if there's no funding behind it, then there's no teeth. And I think that, and what I'm going to offer out to any of you on this call, this is Zoom call, that if you would like to be more involved with some of that political promotion, Oregon Computer Science Teachers Association can't really do it either, but we're all a collective of individuals who can, because we live in Oregon and we have an interest and we can make those contacts. So I'm hoping, and Randy and Jeffrey, we'll talk maybe more at the board where OCSTA can maybe support a little bit more of that going forward over the next 2 months, when that legislative concept and has to be developed and ready for the long session. So I'll just throw that out there, and then Andrew, you can step back on the stage.
Well, I'm happy to continue answering questions. What my intuition says that maybe the best path forward is to give people asynchronous time, not to go into breakout rooms. Now that you've had the sort of the overview of the process and the kind of the history and what we're shooting for, as you are able to in the time you have available. Also ensuring, teachers, you gotta make sure you get some downtime, all right? You gotta recharge your batteries before heading back into the classroom. So prioritize your well-being. But if you do have a few moments and you want to look at the standards, I give you my assurance that your feedback is worthwhile and will be incorporated and discussed and given, ample consideration. So it is, super helpful if you're able to do that.
So Andrew, are you suggesting that we keep this call rolling for a while, or we give people time to go sit on their deck where their Wi-Fi is not as good and take a look at them and then just give feedback as necessary? Well, what's your suggestion? Because I'm here to facilitate whatever we need to do to make this work.
I think that my suggestion is more the latter, to let people, now that you have the information, you have the links, between now and the 15th, if you are able to go in there and add language, add feedback, add notes, that would be very helpful as we head into the next work group meeting. And then we can wrap this up and let people get on their way.
So with that said, thank you. You have your homework assignment, folks. We're giving you, somewhere around 53 minutes to do your homework. Free time, which of course this PD was free anyway. So what's the point? But the point is that Andrew has given you all an opportunity to really be have a megaphone here for him and his team. So I value that a lot. Thank you, Andrew. As far as OCSDA goes and what we can do for you, don't be afraid to reach out to us. I'm going to put my email in particular in the chat, and anybody else who wants to refer. We're currently recording, so we're recording the chat as well. So feel free to put anything here for the last hurrah as we move forward. But I'm going to offer, as we move, also, I'm going to offer my services in the sense of if you are wanting to and or know someone who needs to establish or expand a computer science program. I've been involved in teaching computer science for 40 years, and I've gone through a lot of different ways to influence and to develop curriculum, influence administrators and develop curriculum. And I'm happy to provide any kind of a consultation for you. Then the question is, how much am I going to charge? Well, it's either going to be $500 an hour or zero. It's actually going to be zero. So I don't need to monetize this, but I do want to help anyone and everyone who would need the services to be able to move forward and develop a program. And I really am encouraged by the idea of standards being developed and almost ready to go, because that's something that and I know the 2017 CSTA standards were ones that we could have used and have used, but Andrew, thanks for pushing that standards thing, because I think that's going to be a missing piece that's going to really help move this forward. So to all of you, thanks for being here, and stay in touch.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your time, everyone. Great to see you.
And I'll stay on for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat.
Okay, Terrell, I'm going to drop on out. Have a good rest of the day.
Hey,
too,
thank you,
Jeff.
man. That was good, and I appreciate you being here. And we'll chat later.
Okay, thanks. Have a great one.
This is Tim. Thanks a lot. I seem caught up on what's going on, and I'll probably get into looking at this. I'm not going to have time to review. I've got too many things going on myself getting ready for school, but I'm appreciative of being brought up to date as to what's going on. Thanks.
Excellent. Well,
Absolutely,
Tim, before you take off, you are a connection for all of us in Eastern Oregon. And, we always look for the support of Eastern Oregon University and the STEM Hub out that way to help develop programs, because those students need it like anyone else, and even more so in one sense. And I have a heart for that group in that area of our state. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. And Andrew, I'm sure as because you're going to be out and about, you actually work with students who came from that space.
Yes.
And that feedback through those students that you teach at Eastern Oregon back into the communities. I mean, how do they get to you? They have a computer science interest, but they may not have had it at school. So they themselves have a high interest of their high schools, middle schools, districts to develop programs. So if you can't do it, pass them off to OCSTA, and we can loop back or to the STEM hub, and they can get a hold of us. We can all work on this as a partnership.
Yeah, one of the difficulties is there are so many tiny schools and not very many big ones out in the eastern part of the state.
No, of course. And so what I preach to those schools I said, to an administrator, I said, find a tech savvy, teacher that wants to put 4 kids in the background of a physics, in the back of the room of the physics class, and give them code.org. Start them. I mean, you start somewhere. So you don't have to start with the class. You don't have to start with a full-blown program. And sometimes people, shy away from doing it because they have to have all the ducks in a row and everything in perfect order before they actually launch. No, I can
absolutely not.
Yep.
When I was teaching in middle school, I was teaching at a school where it was a 3-year computer science curriculum. We were going to essentially be through the AP exams by the end of 8th grade. And many of my students were advanced enough that I just sent them to Code HS.
Yeah.
And told them, here's what you need to do. And if you have any questions, come ask me. And most of them thought the materials were good enough that they didn't need any of my help.
Yeah, Andrew may not want to hear this. Andrew may not want to hear this, but so many times the whole idea, and Andrew, I do that. I talk this way, and you did too. The idea that we're not the stage on the stage. We do facilitate learning through the resources that are available to us, and there's so many more resources available to us now, especially with AI, as you mentioned, Andrew. And we had our session yesterday showed an AI development of lesson plans, which we wanted to do the Olympics. How would the Olympics on Venus be for a 5th grade class and have a full lesson? And in 3 minutes we had the full lesson of the relative, the concerns and challenges of Olympics on Venus and a quiz associated with it. And so, I'm leaving the business when some of these resources are there. It's an exciting time. And I think that with an administrator with the right attitude and will, anything can happen on the high-tech learning and CS in the classroom. Anyway,
Yep.
Tim, great to meet you, and we'll chat as time goes.
Okay, thanks. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Hi, Tim.
Bye, buddy.
Well, T.
Hey, Andrew, nice work, man.